We like tripled down on the drumming theme. And the ad was like a typical like candidate walking around in a neighborhood to camera kind of thing. But we had a dude in like a full drum kit. And so Tom would be like, "Hey, my name's Tom Drum. I'm running to be your next senator." And then like, ba-dum-bum, psh, and he's like, "Really?" And then there's like this dude we got to be a drummer. And he's like throughout the ad, like doing a little marching drum for Tom. We definitely went all in on that thematically.
Well, Alex, I'm curious, from your time with the Senate Democrats' political arm, how important was a person's last name for candidate recruitment? Were you constantly looking for people whose names had multi-purposes or there were puns that could be utilized?
It was actually the top of my list.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, never.
Never?
Never.
So Rachel May, that wasn't like...
No. Although when she first ran, she did that Rachel Ray video. Have you ever seen this?
No.
Oh, you got to Google this afterwards. She's like, some people often come up to me and say I'm Rachel Ray, and then she's like cooking. This is when she ran for in the primary, low budget video, and she's like cooking, and it's just like a video. She's trying to get donations. It's great.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about politics and power in New York State. On today's show, we're going to consider the Democratic chances of flipping a North Country congressional seat held for the past decade by Republican Elise Stefanik, who's poised to become the UN ambassador for the Trump administration. We'll discuss why Democrats should care about this deep red district with Alex El-Masri, a vice president with the Parkside Group, and Morgan Hook, managing director in Albany for SKDK. But first, we're going to check in with Shontell Smith, head of the New York practice for Tusk Strategies, where she is a partner. So, Shontell, the big news this week out of Planet Albany was what I'll call conscious decoupling between Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado and Governor Kathy Hochul, which sets the scene for Delgado to potentially launch a campaign for governor, creates a need for Hochul to find a new number 2 for 2026, and makes me wonder what the rest of their shared term will be like. What part of this dynamic do you want to talk about? What do you find the most interesting?
A couple years ago, I was in a relationship, and like everybody around me knew it was a bad relationship. But I was like, no, it's good, it's good, it's good. Like, it's my man. That's what I feel about Delgado and the governor. It's like everybody knew this breakup was happening because privately he has expressed that he is not a number 2 and he's independent from the governor. Like, he has expressed this. He was saying these things privately and like publicly, doing things that, in my opinion, were embarrassing to her. Like being the first one to say Biden should step down, being the first one to say Eric Adams is a problem. These are things that, like, normally when you're a deputy or a lieutenant governor, you would check in with the governor. He's not doing that. So he's been very clear he is independent from her. I've been very vocal about this. I'm like, dude, if you don't rock with her, quit and run against her. So he's made it clear he doesn't rock with the governor. He's made it clear he has intentions to do something if the people want him. I doubt the people want him, but maybe the people want him. Just resign. Because what use are you to the state at this point if your job is to support the governor and you don't support her?
And he's made it clear that he's not resigning.
But I think that's where he messes up, because if I'm the outside, I can't take you seriously. So what are you doing? You're getting paid to do a no-show job? What are you doing? Because your job is to aid the governor. If she steps out of state, she goes to visit her grandchildren. You're the governor. This woman doesn't trust him. He has basically done treacherous acts. Why are we even like participating in this telenovela? Resign. And then if you're about it, run against her. I find it. This is Shontell Smith. Shontell Plummer. I find it just tacky. I think he's pushing her because she's a woman. I do not think he would do the same thing to a man. I don't. I just don't. I think her statement, well, it wasn't her statement, her spokesperson's statement.
Her de facto statement.
It gave me Rich as a Party vibes.
That's funny you say that, because he didn't like the statement.
Under Cuomo vibes.
He didn't like the statement. We talked to Rich as the statement came out, and he basically said, I would just wish him well and make no more comments on it.
But he never did that, so please. Please. As a person who was a recipient of many of his snarky statements.
It's a kinder, gentler Rich as a Party in 2025.
Okay. And I am personal friends with Rich as a Party. But please, it gave me very like Rich as a Party vibes. You're the governor. Don't punch down. To be honest, like no one's paying attention to Delgado. But when you do a statement like that, I think it brings attention to Delgado. I do not believe the governor will have a primary. She will not have a primary by anybody serious. She's a prolific fundraiser. No one's going to buck the white woman. No one. Stop playing these games with these little people. Focus on Lawler. That is the only threat I think the governor has. Mike Lawler, even though he said some problematic things, he was at a Westchester County.
This about the Latino lawmaker?
Yeah, he like questioned like if they were even like, you know, like a citizen or something like wild. This is our America right now. That's the only person she should be concerned about. Delgado, do what you want. Goodbye. You don't want to resign? You're not working for me. I'd cut his budget. I'd slash his resources. Don't put me in power. If you are not assisting the governor, what are you doing? I'm going to give you a line so you and your staff can shit talk me.
Right.
Run around the state and do a counter campaign on government dollars? Please.
Well, then let's not waste any more time speaking about Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado.
I'm disgusted. I'm sorry. Like, I'm always speaking, and then you're just silent. Like, okay, well, let's move on. Like, what are your thoughts? You don't have no thoughts? Or you can't say your thoughts?
Well, I think from a political perspective, what you say about the chance of a serious primary to the governor is true. I mean, we had a fantasy lawmaker draft, and for the 2026 gubernatorial election, my top choice was Kathy Hochul, and I basically made the case that despite the missteps her campaign makes, despite the problems she has in her administration, she's still in the strongest position as the incumbent governor to raise money, to rally institutional support, and
but let me say
a serious person comes against her, I still would rather be Kathy Hochul.
I do think, and I know people are going to hate me for this, if I was the governor or I was her senior staff,
you'd have to take a pay cut.
Anyways, I would reflect on what things I can change so people don't think that they can play with me. Antonio Delgado and Richie Torres think they can play with her. So they think that there's a demographic, and it's interesting, they're both men of color. So to me, that tells me they think she's not doing well with people of color. Maybe that's something I think internally the administration should reflect on and see how they can improve those relationships.
Well, her favorability amongst the black community in New York is better than it is amongst white New Yorkers, but considering that black voters are so much more important in a Democratic primary, having a 50% favorability rating among black voters is probably not good enough, to your point. It needs to be higher than that.
So if I was the administration, I would see, and I would do some soul searching. Could I do better things with consultants, people of color, organizations, non-for-profits, things like that? What can I do to have a better stronghold? You know, I don't want to compare other electeds to the governor, but other electeds have people that work with these constituencies where they feel like they can go speak to the governor, speak to their staff. I don't know if that feeling is felt.
Has this governor ever shown a interest in moderating their approach or making any significant changes to the way they lead and who surrounds them?
I haven't seen that yet.
No.
But I think look, you won 5% last go around. You can be, in Trump's America, when you have probably Bruce Blakeman or Michael, you're going to have a strong Republican running against you. Not like Zeldin was like, well, I could do. But like, he was. I'm sorry to say that. But like a Lawler in Westchester is kind of appealing. A Bruce Blakeman, like, I don't rock with that, but like in Long Island and like some of these people, he is appealing. So she really actually should focus on this demographic that like the New York City demographic, the people of color demographic, like this is going to be her pathway to victory. I don't want to criticize, but I hope her campaign has a strategy to get the vote out amongst African Americans.
Which is a problem. Bronx turnout was really problematic in 2022 and 2024 for Democrats.
I could go on. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Let's move on.
So moving on, and this is another issue, though, that revolves around the governor because of her powers to get the ball rolling to remove Eric Adams as mayor.
Is there even legislation introduced?
So, yeah. Is
there a program bill?
No. Although this is a governor who said she can't introduce bills.
Exactly. The week before, when the whole shit with the primary election bill went down, the governor says, well, I can't introduce bills.
Yeah.
Then the next week,
have I got a bill for you?
I got a bill for you that requires the Senate and the Assembly. Like, come on, y'all. Like, come on.
And
there's no program bill because the governor can introduce bills. She can draft program bills that she sends to the legislature and they introduce.
Yes, as a matter of course.
It's a mechanism for her to have bills in the legislature. Let's just start with that. Number 2, there is no bill.
And no home rule request for that imaginary bill.
And that's another thing. The bill requires a home rule. Crazy. So you need the city council to approve it because it impacts New York City. So you need 2 different legislatures or 2 different governing bodies to approve this. There's no bill. You can't brief conferences if there's no legislation.
Although conference, at least in the Assembly, the New York City Dems discussed
yeah, but they discussed it, but they discussed it broadly because the devil's in the details. If no one's going to be like, yeah, I can do this or no, I can't. But there's always going to be trepidation about doing any type of guardrails that haven't existed for years. Okay, I do not like the way the sitting mayor of New York City is conducting himself personally. I think it's transactional. I think it's not good. But this is not the way to do guardrails. At this point, the primary is 3-4 months? Just let them get voted out and let's just move on. But you can do guardrails and then does this apply to the next mayor? If I am Jessica Ramos, Zellner Myrie, Zoran.
A lot of people who won't be mayor.
Excuse me, you don't know that.
I know Jessica Ramos and Zellner Myrie won't be the next mayor of New York City.
I didn't know that.
I have a crystal ball behind me that I've been rubbing occasionally.
I mean, last mayor election, everyone thought Andrew Yang was the golden boy. He was polling high. We don't know. We really haven't been focused on this mayor race the way we should be focusing on this mayor race. I've said this all along. It will heat up in March. It's when the cooks start cooking. It's gonna get hot in March. That's when it's going to be fun. But I got on a tangent. What were we talking about?
Well, we're talking about how the governor's so-called oversight plan seems to be on a fast train to Nowheresville. So, given that, and do you think that we're going to see her forced to do anything else since what she's pitching is nothing?
I think everyone's going to wait. Look, she could try to force it down everyone's throat during budget, but I'm sure there's other things that the governor needs during budget. I mean, if I was...
She's not holding up the budget for this.
She's not, because she doesn't need to. I think it's the general consensus. Everyone's holding their nose, but let's just hold their nose to June, and then you'll see if he'll still be in power or not. Odds are he probably won't. He's not polling particularly well. I think he has 3 million. Whoa,
I thought we don't trust polling. Andrew Yang, 2020-21.
I'm using your analogy.
A new expression. Dave is always right.
Please, never. Like, let's be clear on this podcast. Big Mama's been right majority of the time. And I'm telling you, like, I'm like, hey, y'all, this is happening. Like, my intuition is crazy. But I'm like, hey, I see this train coming down. You guys should get out the way. Ask Michael Gianaris. On the Senate floor, I was like a psychic. I swear to God. Day of the coup, I was like, all the Republicans are sitting in their seat. Session starts at 3. They're already there. Like, something's going on. I could have told you about this Delgado Hochul breakup maybe 2 months after he won and he was in office. I had one conversation and I was like, this ain't it. This dude don't want to be her number 2. And I told people the conversation. Nobody listens to me. And here we are now. I could have saved people a lot of time.
Since you mentioned Delgado again, and we talked earlier about who the governor surrounds herself with, is there a team that could potentially raise Delgado's profile and
like consultant?
Yeah, is there a team that you think could do a good job with this? Is there an outsider group? Because so far we have yet to see anyone make a substantial headway against incumbent governors, whether it's in 2014 with Zephyr Teachout, 2018 with Cynthia Nixon, or 2022 with Jumaane Williams and Tom Suozzi. And maybe that's just the candidates, but maybe it's the people who they tapped to help them.
How do I say this without being disparaging? Consultants are consultants. Anybody's going to sell you a ticket and tell you they can help you boost your profile. And, it's my understanding a year ago, he was making staffing decisions because he wanted to have more influence in New York City and other areas. He wanted to raise his profile. So when he was hiring for staff, he wanted people with knowledge of downstate and stuff like that to improve his or get his name out or whatever.
And to that end, for reporters who are reaching out to his government office, we would get responses back from Peter Kaufman, who was not a government employee. I'm not saying he was brought on in 2024, but he definitely took a larger role in his team.
God bless. Hell has, if I was governor, I would definitely pay attention to who is going to jump on his team to help him raise his profile or consider all his options.
Do you think he has to hire from outside of New York State? Does he have to bring in people from Washington, D.C.?
You always try to get me in trouble.
Oh, I didn't even think that was a problematic question.
Yeah, because I don't think it's a winning. I never think you can win when you have outside campaign managers that are not from this state.
But is that the only person he could get to work for him in this climate?
Probably. There's probably some DC schmuckle that thinks that they can help him in New York.
Especially if he has money to pay them.
Exactly. And when you go with outside consultants, I'm sorry for whoever this offends, and I know who I'm talking about, and I know I'm going to get a call. When you go with outside consultants out of the state for elections, it generally does not read well because they do not know the tea leaves. We saw that in the last governor's election.
We saw that with somebody like Harry Wilson, a Republican who was mounting a campaign probably 12 years too late and was surrounded by D.C. people, and his primary campaign never took off.
The one thing I will say, because I know I've been crapping on the lieutenant governor this whole session, which is probably not in my best interest, but I do think he has a good read of the people.
Yes. His Biden call was right. His Eric Adams call was right.
Biden call was right. His Eric Adams call was right. So where he is surrounding, he is actually listening and on the ground. If it's not him, his people are listening and on the ground. That is great. I just wish he had conducted himself in a different manner. I think he could have been considered in the future for a position of power like governor. I think if he had just handled this whole Hochul situation differently, he would be much more better suited to lead.
Yeah, 2030 is not that far away.
And he's young.
Well, I think he's 48.
Young. That's a newborn in politics. There's a lot of older people and senior people in politics. He could have waited.
Yeah.
I would have just did my term, sat my ass down, and then raised my profile later on. It was not smart, the execution, if you had a desire to do things in the future.
Yeah, and despite being part of the administration, I don't think he's ever been dragged down by the Hochul problems. I think he's always been a standalone figure. I don't think people
know him to drag him down. He's not known.
No.
He went about this the wrong way. And, if he had ever called me or asked me for my advice, I'd have been like, play your position to the end of the term. Don't run with Hochul. But then, set yourself up in 4 years to be somebody. Instead of, doing this, weird contentious thing where, all my options are open. I'm like, nobody listening.
Yeah, it was strange how he tried to get on the national scene after the 2024 elections. He writes his New York Times op-ed. He has a very awkward appearance on Morning Joe. He was clearly doing stuff that I would have kept the pedal to the metal on, focusing nationally, kind of the way we saw James Skoufis try to raise his profile nationally.
I think it actually worked.
It did, and Delgado should have done that.
It helped. That's what I'm saying. He did not do it correctly. I don't know who's advising him, but if I got enough on my plate with advising people.
You don't want to take on more clients?
I will take on more clients, but not political clients. I am just very busy right now, so it's just no.
Well, we've been speaking with Shontell Smith. She is...
And Bidey. Shontell Plummer.
Is it official?
No, I didn't do my paperwork yet.
Well, we've been speaking with the eventual Shontell Plummer. She's head of the...
And Bidey.
But only one of them is head of the New York State practice for Tusk Strategies, where they're also a partner. And maybe Bidey's the mascot of Tusk Strategies, or that's an aspiring position.
Because my CEO, I feel like he secretly hates dogs, even though he acts like he doesn't. Bidey peed once in the office and it was such a big deal. Oh God, there's a little dog piss on the carpet.
Thanks so much for making the time, Shontell.
Bye.
And before we move on, I want to mention that Dispatches from Planet Albany receive support from New York State United Teachers, National Fuel, and the New York Association on Independent Living. And now we're going to turn our attention north to the 21st Congressional District, and we were joined in the studio this week at the Capitol by Alex El-Masri, a vice president with the Parkside Group, and Morgan Hook, managing director in Albany for SKDK. Well, why don't we turn to what brought us all together today, and that is an op-ed that you wrote, Morgan. And I'm curious, what prompted you to write this piece, which basically argues that while it's a long shot, Democrats shouldn't give up on Elise Stefanik's North Country congressional seat, assuming she becomes UN ambassador, and there is a special election in 2025. Was there something about the Democratic response to date which made you want to pump up the party, or is this just a way for SKDK to drum up some business by saying, yeah, you could win, just follow us to freedom? So
to be perfectly honest, I have been following the New York 21 district ever since I moved to New York. Basically since the Democrats won the first special election. At that point in my career, switched over from being a reporter to working in government. I just followed it closely because it's not quite my backyard, but it's a stone's throw. I live in Paul Tonko's district, but the lines frequently change over there in Saratoga County where I live. And so I've just paid attention to it. And then when Elise Stefanik ran for the first time, I was part of advising, I think that was Aaron Wolf, I think the first time, and I spent time with Aaron Wolf. I did not work on that campaign, but at different points over the years, I've had conversations with, sat in living rooms with, talked to different candidates who've run in that district. So I pay really close attention to it. It's like the white whale of Democrats taking back this seat. So I frankly think that Elise Stefanik could have held that seat for the rest of her life. She could have had it as long as she ever wanted. She was never going to go anywhere. Nobody could beat her. But what was interesting to me about sort of what is developing right now in that seat is there are these conditions in it, and I take great pains. After I wrote it and people reached out and said they read it, they were like, I don't know if I'm as optimistic as you. And I kind of said, I don't know that I was being terribly optimistic about it. The original working title of it was from Dumb and Dumber, when she says, more like 1 in a million, and the response is, so you're telling me there's a chance? Like, that was the original title, like 1 in a million. But if it is that 1 in a million, here are some things that are happening that I see that maybe don't be surprised, because one is Elise Stefanik's not running. Her incredible buy-in with the conservative media ecosystem, which is vast, disappears overnight. Whoever runs in her place has no national name recognition, period. She's become one of the best fundraisers in the country, and all of that goes away. The other big thing, and this is, as every day that goes by since it was written and since she was nominated, Donald Trump is an incredibly unpopular president doing things that are very unpopular. The more time I think that elapses between when she eventually is going to leave that seat and when a special election is held, the more time there is for his incredibly unpopular things to be realized by voters and to be felt by voters, and it will make it that much more difficult for any Republican candidate running. Now, again, that's a very difficult district for Democrats to win in. The voter enrollment hugely favors Republicans, so it's a long shot. But there are, I believe, conditions that make it worth us having a conversation about.
Alex, tapping into your campaign experience, which primarily is on behalf of the Senate Democrats in New York, what do you see as the bank shot off the roof against the scoreboard and maybe off a player's head that could come together for Democrats in this seat? And second of all, is it safe to assume a Democratic candidate has a better chance in a standalone special election than if the election overlaps with the November local elections?
I think special elections in districts like this is the way to win it because turnout can just be so funky. And if you're a candidate who has the resources, which clearly, I think I was reading the other day, like he's raised like $1 million so far. And by the way, it's a cheap district to do paid media in. If you have the resources and a real good campaign, like a special election, you get your people out. By the way, historically, when there's a Republican president, Republicans don't turn out in the following election, especially a special election. Let's say it's like, in June after Stefanik gets officially nominated, like who's going to be around and paying attention? It's going to be the people, hardcore voters that are paying attention. And like, that's where funky things can happen. And I think that's definitely an uphill battle or a bank shot off the, court at the other end of the hall. But I think like that's the perfect conditions for this to happen, for the upset to happen, for Democrats to possibly win.
Trick shot videos are very popular right now. Yeah. My kids watch them all the time.
They're often doctored, though. And
I was just going to say it's hard to tell sometimes.
So, Alex, how would you pitch to Democrats that they should invest their blood, sweat, and tears in this uphill battle, which might be different than the recruitment you had to do with the Senate Dems, since you were part of the effort after they took the majority in 2018 and showed that the GOP could be beat in state Senate seats where maybe they seemed invulnerable to a certain degree.
Yeah, and also, so I ran Skoufis's race in 2018, and that's before we had the majority. So
but if I had to pick a candidate to back in 2018, I think Skoufis in that district would have been like shooting fish in a barrel. Morgan gave me a look. So
I'm just saying, give the guy credit where credit's due here. You win a race, you win a race.
Do you want to call me out for that, Alex?
I'll move on.
Okay.
Look, I think there's a lot of, and I'm hearing, especially this week, more than ever, there's a lot of anxiety among Democrats right now, and I think they need an outlet. And I think a lot of people are like, what can we do? What can we do? Go knock doors in the North Country. And I think that is the sell to people. And I think it's like, yes, it's an uphill battle. Maybe under the right circumstances he wins. But by the way, if he outperforms Stefanik's results by 4, 5, 6 points, that's a good thing heading into a pivotal election year where Majority Leader Jeffries only needs 3 seats to become Speaker, right? And I think it gives momentum, and I think it's an outlet for Democrats to go and do something and try to make a difference.
I think the outlet part is a big part of it because you've got 3 special elections in the entire country right now, only 2 of them right now, actually, in Florida, because Stefanik has not left her seat yet. I don't know about you guys, but I get the texts. I get text messages asking me to give money to these 2 Florida special elections.
They're looking for my parents' money because I'm on a family plan, but yes, I am familiar with those.
So I can guarantee that there are going to be residents of California who are really upset with whatever Donald Trump is doing in a month or 2 months or 3 months, whenever this special election is going to be held. And they're going to get those texts, and they are going to give money. And so this guy is going to have money to spend. Mm-hmm. And again, because she's not running, because at least Stefanik isn't going to be there, I think that the money, the ledger, the balance of money in these respective campaigns is going to be even. You could see a world where the Democrat even had more.
to give folks hope and sell it, right? I mean, you have the sticker, I call him sticker mule guy, right? The super conservative guy. He's saying he's going to primary next year if he doesn't get the nomination. So that means not only do you have the Democrats out there with all this energy, you also have him. He could be attacking Senator Steck every day from the right. And again, in a special election, he's not MAGA enough, blah, blah, blah. 5% of those people stay home. There's another ingredient in the pot, right? I think to use my baking analogy because I'm a baker, you need all of these ingredients to come out perfectly to win. But they're all kind of there on the sidelines.
And when we think about ingredients, that division on the right was clearly there in 2009 with a Republican and conservative candidate on the ballot. But the party leadership, at least, seems much more disciplined this go around and unlikely to repeat that mistake. So is this essentially a missing ingredient from the cake Democrats are trying to bake in 2025? You're shaking your head, Morgan.
Yeah, I agree with Morgan's facial expression. I think more than ever, party leadership is completely irrelevant in these races when you have someone who has a national platform. Roger Stone is his consultant.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we have someone, and like he can go on podcasts. Everyone says podcasts are the way in politics now. You can go on podcasts, and he has 2.5
dispatches from Planet Albany.
Exactly. I'm sure you can get him on your show next week.
We've had Anthony Constantino on the Capitol Press Room. He requested to come on. It was quite an experience.
I'm sure it was. But he can still mess with the system, irregardless of what the quote-unquote conservative party power brokers want to do.
They might pick someone else. They might meet with him behind closed doors and say, we don't want this guy running. I say that as not knowing anything about him. He has got some of this buy-in from that right-wing media ecosystem, which is really the kingmaker in Republican politics right now, is if you can get bought into that whole thing. If they run someone who's a local elected official, you said Senator Steck, you could run the guy from Rensselaer County.
Steve McLaughlin?
Yeah, that guy. You run that guy, they're going to be throwing bombs at each other for months.
Which they were already on Twitter.
Right. They already are. So they're not listening to party chairs. Neither of those guys is going to listen to the chairs if they pick one or the other.
Well, before we move on, I want to note that Alex successfully won that 2018 state Senate campaign for Jim Skoufis by 8 points. But we mentioned also this idea that money is going to be rolling in for a Democrat, or could be. And how important is spending that money on people who are familiar with the district as opposed to people who might be familiar running congressional races? Because we often have political consultants, and you guys are obviously wonderful, who will get people excited to run a race. I think of somebody like Harry Wilson in 2022, even if that wasn't necessarily the best thing for him to do, but it was a way for them to get paid. So how do you guys think about spending this money and the best way to use it?
I am of two minds about how important is money in these elections and how important is the candidate. Nate Silver will tell you that candidates don't matter. Campaigns don't matter. It's all the uncontrollables. How is the economy doing? How's the unemployment rate? And I think that there is an element of truth to that, to the point where candidates don't matter unless they are a disaster.
Or really good.
Well,
I think about Angelo Santa Barbara in the Rotterdam area and just outperforming the top of his ticket and having this sort of split ticket voting with, say, George Amador for state Senate.
Sure. I think what we're saying is those are the outliers, right? The really, really terrible candidates or the really, really good candidates are maybe the
Jim Skoufises of the world.
Jim Skoufises
and their campaign managers.
Yes. And their campaign managers. I think money is important. Money is a way you get your message out. Money is a way you control the sort of narrative around the race. If we're going to talk about this race and this special election in this year, I think that the most important thing is going to be whatever condition the North Country is in because of the policies coming from the Trump administration. Are they going to be firing thousands of federal employees? There are probably about 10,000 federal employees who live in that district. How many of them are going to lose their jobs? Are they going to be messing with immigrants who work at dairy farms? Are they going to be messing with the Canadian border and the massive amount of trade that exists between New York 21 businesses and families and dairy farms that are in New York 21 and have trade with Canada? What are those conditions? What's Fort Drum going to look like in another couple of months? Those conditions will be far more important than any of the candidates running.
Yeah, I agree with 90% of that. I think in a special election, there's an extra spotlight, both locally and nationally, on the candidates. In a general election, I 100% agree with what you're saying. doesn't even have to be a disaster candidate, but if there is some scandal, if either the Democrat or Republican, a real scandal, not a manufactured, pitched by the Oppo guy scandal, having that spotlight, that will be all over the news because there's nothing else politically to cover in mid-June.
Yeah.
And by the way, like there's a scandal, then donors are like, why am I supporting this person? Right. So I think that can snowball a little bit. And again, in a special election where turnout's going to be abysmally low, people see that scandal and they're like, I don't need to vote. It's June. I'm going to like Lake Placid with my family instead.
Good reference.
Yeah.
So,
it's a big district, so I got to know like one local thing.
I'm going to Bluff Point for a round of golf in Plattsburgh. What about the idea of a scandal, though? So we've had the Democrats appoint this dairy farmer, and we've had some audio come out about his past interviews and comments he's made, including saying, quote, "It's hard to find one local person that doesn't have domestic abuse problems, alcohol problems," and this is him talking about the district that he's looking to represent. Is that a real problem? And I guess more broadly, is this guy a good candidate? I can't even pronounce his last name.
Gendabine, I think.
There's a lot in that sentence.
I don't think we have any way of knowing if he's a good candidate. On paper, I certainly like the idea of a multi-generational dairy farmer running in this district, especially since they've had a carpetbagger representing them for the last decade plus.
You kind of wish, though, he just came out of the womb just now and hadn't passed.
You know, there was a Dave Catalfamo, who is a Republican strategist, former communications director for George Pataki and a friend of mine.
Former assembly candidate?
Yes, I love Dave. Dave said something recently on a panel he and I were on where he said, I love to run a candidate with no record, and I love to run against a candidate with a record, right? Yes, you want your candidates to come out of the womb. You want them to be blank slates. You want them to have nothing that you can criticize them for. And so that's what the Oppo guys are going to do. I got to be honest, like this, nobody's heard about this tape. It's not like they're running ads.
Not yet.
Who's going to pay for the ads?
The Republican Party?
Yeah, where are they going to get the money?
Well, Anthony Constantino said he was going to spend millions of dollars on this.
But he's not getting the nomination.
Okay.
The point is I don't know that this one recording I don't even know. Is it a recording? See, here's the thing. I'm in this bubble. The three of us are in this like political Albany bubble.
We'll call it Planet Albany.
Planet Albany. I pay attention to this district. I care about this candidate, and I haven't even read one of those stories or heard the audio. So like real people, I'll use air quotes, they have not heard that yet. That's not – no, yes. Could they run ads? Sure. Scandals come and go really fast these days. And I think for someone who decides beforehand that they don't want to like a Democrat, then yes, that audio will have a huge impact. And for somebody who has decided beforehand that they are not going to vote for the Republican, that audio will have zero impact.
Yeah, and I think it also shows a little anxiety among Republicans and Stefanik. Like, she has her press person on Twitter tweeting out the article. Yeah. I think it shows some anxiety. Like, you don't drop Oppo the day a candidate is announced when you don't even know when election day is, unless if you're like, oh, we have a problem. Like for me, you ignore the candidate if you really think you're going to win, right? Because you don't want to give them any time to respond. Like you don't want to pretend. You want to pretend like they're not there. You want to pretend they're irrelevant. And the fact that they dropped this, I think it was within 24 hours of being picked and shopped. I'm sure they shopped it around and whatever.
Sure, that's their best stuff too.
Right, exactly. And at the end of the day, to Morgan's point, it doesn't affect people's pockets, right? Like if you're a farmer in the district and Trump just cut a $40,000 grant that you're hoping to get, that's going to sure as hell affect your vote more than some audio you heard in Times Union. No offense to the Times Union.
They're a wonderful partner, and I used to work there. But, Alex, you mentioned this idea of how you engage with a candidate if you're not afraid of them. And I'm curious, were you one of those campaign strategists who said, don't even mention the other person because that will elevate them in some way?
No. I mean, if you're at that point where you're talking, I don't think it makes a difference if you say my opponent versus, Senator Fahey. I don't think that makes a difference.
Were you working the Ted Dance campaign?
I was working all the campaigns as DSCC.
Gotcha.
Do you use his heating and cooling company?
So, fun story. I have actually played softball against Ted Dance, and one night I was texting with somebody, and Pat Fahey's out in Montgomery County hitting the sticks and talking to voters, and he's playing in a slow pitch softball game in Troy, which made me think, I don't know how serious he is about this.
Yeah, if you're playing softball outside of the district, I think that is
Well, with redistricting, maybe he wasn't really quite sure whether he was in the new district or what was going on.
Well, but he was playing with a member of the media, so maybe that was...
Touche. And would anyone care to guess what position he plays?
Second base.
Alex?
shortstop.
Pitcher.
Oh.
Pitcher.
Did he try to pitch you on a story?
He did not. I don't think he was cognizant of the fact that he was playing reporters.
That's good.
But I want to turn to something that's happening, or at least was poised to happen here, which is a change to the special election calendar. And this has been on hold, but could theoretically be picked up at any time. And I'm curious whether either of you think that meddling with this calendar, specifically for the purpose of keeping this seat vacant longer, could be detrimental against the Democrats in this district specifically. I don't think voters outside the state would care at all, but with this district, could it matter at all?
I don't think so. I think this is another Planet Albany insider thing. Like, you're not, by the way, if Republicans want to put on a piece of mail that the Democrats move the election date rather than using their usual crime, immigration, tax stuff, great. Like, if that's what they want to put on a piece of mail, then we're winning the election, and they're not going to put that on a piece of mail. So I think it's all just to needle and, make folks in Albany and, the governor's life hell. But I don't think they'll ever put paid media behind it. And if you're not putting paid media behind it, then I don't think any voter will care. By the way, to Morgan's previous point, you go into a ShopRite in Plattsburgh.
Kitty's Drugs, maybe.
Yeah, Kitty's Drugs.
Do we think they have a ShopRite in Plattsburgh?
I don't know. How far north does ShopRite go?
I was commenting more on the size of Plattsburgh, but you could be right.
It's a college town. It's a college town.
I'll Google it.
Come on.
Sorry,
City of Plattsburgh
Stewart's.
or the town of Plattsburgh?
Stewart's in Plattsburgh.
That they definitely have.
If you go to Stewart's in Plattsburgh, there's no way anyone will have any idea about this bill.
If this election gets postponed until the fall, until the summer, nobody's even going to remember that it got moved. If they even knew in the first place that it got moved.
If it got moved to November, though, doesn't that help Republicans and their chances of holding the seat, given the more traditional turnout you have?
Yeah, there's no top of the ticket. I think it's the top of the ticket that drives it. I think that only matters if there's some big local races.
Keeping it simple, though, I think about Kathy Hochul's special election, and it was Medicare. One issue. What is the one issue, if they have to focus on one issue that might stem from the federal government, that a Democrat could focus on and potentially ride to victory?
It's not one issue like...
It's pocketbook issues.
Yes.
You think that's simple enough? For people to get their heads around?
It's the job. It's jobs, and it's the dairy farms and jobs. And did 5,000 people just get fired by Elon Musk in the North?
And this is a district where it's a big district, so you don't know like the person who's a 3-hour drive away. But in each town, everyone knows someone. So if one person in that town lost their job or lost out on a grant or their boss did, everyone else in that town is going to know about it. This is still a district where I think word of mouth actually matters. And again, if one person gets affected, everyone else is going to know about it and feel it.
The latest talking point I feel like I'm hearing from Republicans is, hey, we're going to feel a little pain. Then we're about to feel a lot of pain. And I think in a district like that, they're going to feel it acutely.
So if it's a long shot for Democrats to win in
bank shot,
a long, difficult trick bank shot that you need AI to actually pull off, what does that say about 2026? Is this just a short-term rental if a Democrat does pull off an upset in 2025?
There's a lot of power in incumbency. Let's say he wins, takes office, and you can start delivering.
And that's if who wins?
Blake.
Blake who?
Gendabine.
Okay.
By the way, there's no Republican because he can't even figure out who to pick. So
right.
What's the rush? There's no open seat.
That's true.
If they had a good candidate, they would have put one forward.
So incumbency is enough to drag the special election winner, if it's a Democrat, across the finish line in 2026?
It's a shorter bank shot. It's an easier bank shot.
So it's not like Scott Murphy in 2010?
Scott Murphy wasn't a very dynamic member of Congress. So before we had talked about do candidates matter, occasionally can have a Democrat in a Republican seat or a Republican in a Democrat seat, and if the voters decide they like this person, and again, on paper, Blake, I'm not going to try and say his last name, Blake is...
Jellybean.
Blake Jellybean is a dairy farmer. He is of that district. He is multi-generational. His family go back decades in that district. Like, if he sounds the right way and he talks about the right things and people connect with him, you could envision that maybe he is the profile that will be the Democrat who can hold a Republican seat.
So I did some research on ShopRite, and it looks like they had a tough go of it a couple years ago and closed a lot of stores to the point where I searched Plattsburgh, nothing. I searched Saratoga Springs, where I live, came up with nothing. I searched Albany, I came up with nothing. So it's possible that your reference may have resonated more a few years ago than it does now.
We'll go with the Stewart's take.
I think Stewart's is always the safe bet. Morgan, are you looking up grocery stores right now?
Yeah, I don't have any Wi-Fi signal, though.
Okay. Well, let's leave it there. We've been speaking with Alex Almazri. He's a vice president with the Parkside Group, and Morgan Hook, managing director in Albany for SKDK. Thank you both so much for visiting me.
Thank you, Dave.
Did you want to say that, Morgan?
You're good. I'm good.
Okay. And before we conclude, I just want to recognize the passing of Albany lobbyist Kevin Baines, who was a familiar, well-liked face to anyone who spent time on the third floor of the Capitol. His presence will be missed.
Hi, I'm Rachel May. People often ask me, isn't your name Rachel Ray? No, I am not a celebrity chef, but I am in the kitchen cooking up some good democracy.
Oh my God.